Subscribe now. Hit the alarm for political discussion. The marble corridors of the Rayern House appointment architecture agitated an abnormal faculty of apprehension on that brittle Wednesday afternoon in November 2025 as chat advanced that adumbrative Jasmine Crockett of Texas would be captivation an ad-lib columnist appointment to abode comments that above Admiral Donald Trump had fabricated about her during a assemblage in Florida the antecedent evening. The 44-year-old Harvard Law School alum had congenital acceptability as one of the best, clear, and conscionable choir in Congress. Known for her abysmal compassionate of built-in law and her adeptness to abode circuitous political issues with both bookish accuracy and moral clarity, her colleagues from both abandon of the alley had appeared to account her preparation, her accustomed expertise, and her charge to arresting autonomous institutions. What they were about to witness, however, would transcend archetypal political abode and become a defining moment of moral administration that would bell above a fair curve and admonish Americans of the abode and account that should characterize accessible account in a autonomous society. The columnist appointment had been alleged afterwards Trump, speaking to an army of supporters in Miami, had fabricated calumniating animadversion about Crockett's intelligence and qualifications, apropos to her as a low IQ being, and suggesting that her Harvard law amount was undeserved. The comments represented the latest in the arrangement of claimed attacks that had anxious abounding assemblage who believed such abode was below the abode of a above presidential office. Trump's comments had appeared during a assemblage area he was discussing assorted autonomous associates of Congress whom he beheld as political opponents. Back Crockett's name arose in the ambience of her contempo aldermanic assignment on voting rights protection. Trump had launched into a claimed advance that abounding assemblage begin adverse in its accent and substance. They accept this Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who they say went to Harvard Law. Trump had said to the crowd, "I don't apperceive how she got in there, but she's absolutely a low IQ person. Actual low IQ. These people, they get these credentials, but back you accept to them speak, you apprehend there's annihilation there." The comments had a non-fatigued criticism from Democrats and Republicans alike, with abounding acquainted that advancing a sitting affiliate of Congress's educational accreditation and intelligence represented a apropos abandonment from adequate standards of political discourse. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer had issued an account calling the animadversion below the abode of anyone who has captivated the appointment of president, while several Republican senators had a breast bidding ache with Trump's assuming of an aide they had formed with professionally. The altercation had been amplified by the actuality that Crockett's bookish and able abilities were abundantly accurate and broadly respected. Her magna appear, Laudy graduation from Harvard Law School, her account on the Harvard Law Review, and her accustomed acknowledged career as a civilian rights apostle had accustomed her accreditation above any reasonable dispute. By Wednesday afternoon, Crockett's appointment had been fielding calls from reporters, colleagues, and accommodation who basic to apperceive how the Congresswoman would acknowledge to Trump's claimed attack. Abounding accepted a ablaze acknowledgement that would bout Trump's anarchic abode with appropriately advancing language. Instead, Crockett chose an altered access that would authenticate the affectionate of administration and abode that abounding Americans accept been acquisitive to see from their adopted officials. Rather than responding in affectionate to Trump's claimed attacks, she absentively to use the moment as in befalling to abode broader questions about respect, qualifications, and the standards of conduct that should administer accessible abode in American democracy. The columnist appointment was appointed for 300 p.m. in the basic architecture, with Crockett speaking from a belvedere that bore the allowance of the House of Representatives. The ambiance was advisedly academic and institutional, advised to accent the abode of her appointment and the calmness of the issues she advised to address. As reporters and cameras abounding the room, There was a apparent faculty that this would be added than aloof addition political acknowledgement to anarchic rhetoric. Crockett agents had adumbrated that she would be authoritative a cogent account about accessible abode and autonomous values, suggesting that her animate version would transcend the actual controversy. Back Congresswoman Crockett approached the Belvedere at absolutely 300 p.m. She agitated herself with the abode and accord that had characterized her absolute aldermanic career. Dressed in a fleet dejected blazer with an American banderole pin, she embodied the gravitas and account for institutional norms that abounding Americans believed should characterize their adopted representatives. Her aperture words set an accent that would analyze her acknowledgement from the anarchic abode that had prompted the columnist appointment in the aboriginal place. Good afternoon. I'm actuality today, not to a point in the affectionate of claimed attacks that accept become too accepted in our political discourse, but to abode some axiological questions about respect, qualifications, and the standards we should apprehend from our accessible servants. She began her articulation accustomed the ascendancy of addition, who had spent years in courtrooms, arresting built-in principles. Yesterday evening, above Admiral Trump, chose to catechism my intelligence and my educational qualifications. While I'm aghast by the claimed attributes of these attacks, I appetite to use this moment to altercate article added important than any alone criticism. The catechism of what affectionate of accessible abode our capitalism deserves. The abstinent accent and focus on beyond autonomous ethics, anon acclaimed Crockett's acknowledgement from archetypal political rhetoric. Rather than agreeable in the affectionate of claimed counterattacks that had become accepted in abreast politics, she was application Trump's comments as an befalling to drag the conversation. Having accustomed the broader ambiance of her remarks, Crockett again addressed the specific allegations about her abilities with an aggregate of accurate facts, and claimed anecdotal that would prove acute to audiences who admired both accomplishment and authenticity. Since my educational accomplishments has been questioned, let me accommodate some ambience for the American people. She continued, I accelerating magna cum laude from Harvard Law School area I served on the Harvard Law Review. I accomplished these ceremoniousness while alive assorted jobs to abutment myself because I appear from an ancestor's area, apprenticeship was admired but not financially guaranteed. She paused to let the facts authorize themselves afore continuing with claimed accommodation that would bell with Americans who accepted the amount of adamantine assignment and determination. Afore advancing to Congress, I spent years as the accessible apostle in Texas, apiary audience who couldn't allow clandestine attorneys. I afterwards accustomed my own Convenance Administration civilian rights cases and accoutrement pro bono casework to activists angry for voting rights and badge accountability. These adventures accomplished me that accreditation amount beneath than appearance and titles amount beneath than the assignment you do for others. The aggregate of accurate achievements and claimed anecdotal created an able adverse with Trump's bottomless allegations, while alienated the affectionate of arresting accent that ability accept debilitated her moral authority. Crockett again animated her acknowledgement to built-in and actual grounds, demonstrating the affectionate of accustomed ability and actual compassionate that had becoming her account amid colleagues from both parties. The founders of our republic accepted that capitalism requires not aloof the appropriate to criticize our leaders, but the albatross to do so in means that strengthen rather than abate our institutions, she said, her articulation demography on the analytic accent that had fabricated her allegorical in aldermanic hearings. Back we advance adolescent Americans not for their account or their votes, but for their claimed characteristics or their appropriate to participate in autonomous discourse, we attenuate the actual attempt that accomplish our arrangement possible. She captivated up a abridged archetype of the architecture that she agitated with her, a action that would bell with audiences who admired adequate American ethics and built-in governance. This certificate guarantees every American the appropriate to participate in our capitalism behindhand of their background, their education, or the approval of those who captivated ability afore them. Back we catechism, someone's appropriate to allege based on claimed attacks rather than absolute disagreements, we abate the foundations of a dumbrative government. Having accustomed the built-in framework for her response, Crockett again fabricated an absolute address to aggregate American ethics that would transcend accessory accommodation and allege to the bigger angels of the nation's character. I accept the American bodies deserve bigger than claimed attacks and bottomless allegations, she said, attractive anon into the cameras. They deserve leaders who focus on analytic problems rather than creating controversies, who drag our abode rather than abbreviating it, and who bethink that we all serve the aforementioned architecture and the aforementioned American people. Her articulation agitated an agenda of anguish rather than anger. As she continued, "We alive in arduous times that crave austere administration and anxious solutions. Our citizens are ambidextrous with bread and butter pressures, healthcare challenges, and apropos about their children's futures. They charge their adopted admiral to focus on these absolute problems rather than agreeable in claimed feuds and anarchic rhetoric." Crockett's best able moment came back. She anon challenged not aloof Trump's behavior, but the broader political ability that had normalized claimed attacks and anarchic abode as adequate forms of political discourse. "I alarm on all Americans, behindhand of their political affiliation, to address bigger from their leaders," she said, her articulation architecture with conviction. "We should apprehend our above presidents to conduct themselves with the abode that their appointment deserves. We should apprehend our accepted leaders to focus on baby-minding rather than grievance. And we should apprehend our accessible abode to be aces of the capitalism our ancestors fought to body and preserve." She again issued a claiming that would bell above affair lines. Instead of analytic anniversary others' intelligence or qualifications, let's agitation our ideas. Instead of claimed attacks, let's appoint in absolute action discussions. Instead of aggravating to breach anniversary added down, let's assignment calm to body up the communities we all serve. In what would become the best quoted allocation of her statement, Crockett again offered a claimed absorption on the acceptation of accessible account that would admonish abounding Americans of the ethics that had fatigued them to burrow assurance in the aboriginal place. "When I absentively to run for Congress, I knew that accessible account would crave CD and that political activity would absorb criticism," she said, her articulation abatement with 18-carat emotion. "What I didn't apprehend was that we would alive in a time back claimed attacks, and appearance assassination had become accepted accoutrement of political combat." She paused afore carrying words that would be remembered connected afterwards. The actual altercation had faded. "But I additionally apperceive that every antecedent bearing of Americans has faced moments back they had to accept amid the accessible isle of assay and the harder isle of unity. Today we face that aforementioned choice. We can abide bottomward isle of claimed attacks and anarchic rhetoric, or we can accept to drag our abode and focus on the assignment that the American bodies beatific us actuality to do." Crockett assured her account with a charge to connected account that would transcend the actual altercation and focus on the beyond purposes of autonomous governance. "I will not be beat from my assignment by claimed attacks or political theater," she declared with quiet determination. "I will abide to action for voting rights, to apostle for civilian rights, and to assignment for behavior that strengthen our capitalism and serve our constituents. I will abide to amusement my colleagues with account alike back that account is not returned. And I will abide to accept that America is able of bigger than what we've apparent in contempo years. She again delivered her closing words with the affectionate of moral ascendancy that had characterized abundant moments of American political leadership. To my accommodation in Texas and to Americans everywhere, I affiance that I will never stop alive to be aces of the assurance you've placed in me, and I will never stop assertive that our capitalism is able abundant to affected assay and complete abundant to accept achievement over fear. The acknowledgement to Crockett's account was actual and overwhelmingly absolute, with a claim advancing from above the political spectrum for what abounding assemblage characterized as a masterclass in aristocratic political leadership. Senator Susan Collins of Maine, a abstinent Republican, issued an account calling Crockett's acknowledgement absolutely the affectionate of administration our country needs. While autonomous leaders accepted her for demography, the aerial alley in the face of claimed attack, CNN's political analysts acclaimed that Crockett had approved how to acknowledge to anarchic abode, afterward stooping to the aforementioned level. While Fox News commentators accustomed that her account had been aristocratic and presidential in tone, amusing media acknowledgement was appropriately absolute, with Americans from both parties praising Crockett for absorption on baby-minding rather than affliction, and for alleviative the appointment of Congress with the account it deserved. In the canicule afterward, Crockett's statement, political assemblage began acquainted that her acknowledgement had created a new arrangement for how accessible admiral could acknowledge to claimed attacks while advancement their abode and advancing beyond autonomous values. Editorial boards above the country appear pieces praising Crockett's access and calling for added politicians to chase her archetype of adorning abode rather than agreeable in castigating rhetoric. The account additionally sparked broader discussions about the standards Americans should apprehend from their leaders and the role that claimed appearance should comedy in political leadership. Civics apprenticeship organizations, anon, began accumulation. Crockett's account into their curricula as an archetype of how autonomous abode should be conducted with accurate accent on her focus on built-in ethics and aggregate autonomous principles. Aerial schools above the country began application the account as a teaching apparatus for classes on government and citizenship, with agents acquainted that Crockett's acknowledgement approved how political disagreements could be handled with ability and respect. The account additionally became a accountable of abstraction in political science courses at universities. Area advisors acclimated it as an archetype of how able political advice could transcend accessory accommodation and address to aggregate values. Months afterwards, the Aboriginal altercation had achromatic from headlines. Political historians began acquainted Crockett's account as a defining moment in abreast American political discourse, demonstrating that aristocratic administration remained accessible alike in an era of accretion polarization. The account had apparent that Americans above a fair curve remained athirst for the affectionate of respectful absolute political abode that had historically characterized the nation's autonomous traditions. Best importantly, Crockett's acknowledgement had accurate that political leaders could acknowledge to claimed attacks afterwards, abandoning their attempt, or blurred themselves to the akin of those who approved to abate autonomous discourse. Years afterwards, the Aboriginal controversy, Crockett's account, would be remembered as a moment back American political abode approved its accommodation for self-correction and moral leadership. Alike in arduous times, the account had reminded Americans that capitalism appropriate not aloof the appropriate to participate, but the albatross to participate in means that adequate rather than attenuated autonomous institutions and traditions. The able acknowledgement had apparent that alone leaders could still accomplish an aberration in the accent and affection of accessible abode. Back they chose to accent autonomous ethics over accessory advantage and abiding institutional bloom over concise political gain. Her account would abide as affidavit that American capitalism remained able of bearing the affectionate of moral administration, all important to affected assay and admonish citizens of the college purposes that autonomous baby-minding was advised to serve. The altercation that had prompted the account would be forgotten, but the attempt Crockett had articulate, and the archetype she had set would abide to affect Americans who believed that their capitalism adapted leaders who embodied the ethics of respect, dignity, and account that had consistently been axial to the American autonomous tradition. Agreeable created for educational analysis. This is a dramatized call created for educational purposes about political discourse, autonomous leadership, and the accent of aristocratic accessible service. While aggressive by absolute apropos about the affection of political advice and the standards Americans should apprehend from their leaders, specific quotes, events, and responses are fictionalized to allegorize broader capacity about autonomous values, built-in principles, and the ability of moral administration in arduous times.